Welcome to Season 3, Episode 19 of the Be Conscious podcast. Today I am so excited because I have the pleasure of doing an encore interview with the beautifully confident Lady Garland Guidry. Here we go.
Welcome to the Be Conscious podcast, the show that brings you enlightened perspectives on the frequency of money, life's many challenges, and those heavy feelings that may be holding you back from living your best life. And now your host, Dr. Susan Nicholas.
Garland Guidry is a motivational speaker, a multicultural hairstylist, and the owner of Outer Beauty. She's a transgender advocate and the author of the book Memoirs of a Geisha that can be purchased on Amazon.com. Now, if you've listened to my podcast before, you recognize this is the second interview that I'm having with this amazing lady. She and I co-moderate the Money Consciousness Room on Clubhouse, where we heal your money story each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, Lady Garland and I have also created the Conscious Gender Equality Room on Clubhouse, where we heal and bridge the gap between the LGBTQ plus community and the cis hetero community. We serve in this space every Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You see, we believe that we are all human and that we are all one. Now, I want you to continue to follow Lady Garland after this interview on Clubhouse, on Instagram, for the upcoming release of her audiobook of Memoirs of a Geisha. Now, Lady Garland has served on panels for the Huntington Hospital in Pasadena to help educate their staff to understand the lived experience of sexuality and gender identity. She believes her purpose in life is to use her many gifts and talents to serve others and to be a light for all those who cross her path. Lady Garland, welcome to the Be Conscious podcast. Thank you for honoring me with this encore interview and all of our listeners. Did I miss anything today?
You did not. I'm like, okay, wow, this is amazing listening to an intro of myself.
Well, that's because you're an amazing person.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting perspective when we hear others talk about us, how they perceive and see us and how they feel about us. It's always pretty amazing.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me that we're our own toughest inner critic. Some say ourself, the saboteur inside of us that's always knocking us down and reminding us that we're not good enough in some way, or we're lacking in that way, or comparing ourselves to others. So I'm glad that you felt elevated by hearing your own biography.
Yes. I start off my book by saying I am my own worst critic, or I am my toughest critic.
Yes. And I believe that's true for all of us. You know, I talk about looking in the mirror, and most of us, we are laser focused on exactly that which we don't like about ourselves. And I believe that starts and continues the pattern of self-deprecation, where we don't see the beauty in ourselves. Yeah, so I've begun this practice of looking in the mirror and just singing a song. You're beautiful, my one desire. That kind of song.
Yes.
Just like something that keeps coming in my mind, just to remind myself that there's also beauty there, you know, with all the imperfections and everything else that we see.
You told one of the beautiful ladies in the Money Consciousness Club today to look in the mirror and to, you know, there's things about yourself that you do like, because she mentioned it. And so in that wonderful movie that I mentioned on Clubhouse, on there, I wanted to mention that today because you had said it, and that that she told all of these ladies to look in the mirror, and everyone, each person had to say something that they liked about themselves. And for some of them, it was really difficult. Um, and so, like you said, we could become laser focused on the things that we consider imperfections, and then we don't see the whole picture. And looking at the whole picture is what's beautiful.
Exactly, exactly. And I sometimes feel that the true beauty of each and every one of us is in the what we perceive as imperfection, that it's not really imperfection. It's just it's what makes us us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were all the same and we all looked the same and we were, I don't know, spotless and ageless and, flawless, how boring would that be? We wouldn't know the contrast, right? Everything is relative to something else.
Absolutely.
So beauty is relative to, let's say, not beauty. Pain is relative to wellness. Happiness is relative to sadness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know the true love if we haven't felt unloved.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it takes all of it. And
Yes.
this kind of opening, we're going to talk a lot about relationships in this podcast. And I think one of the most fundamental relationships is the one that we have with ourselves. You talked in our very first broadcast about your development of that relationship with yourself, of beginning to love yourself, accept yourself. And you talked about this in your book, Memoirs of a Geisha, that there was a time that you were doing all this stuff to the outer self, fabulous outer self, but the inner self was not ready, not healed,
Mm-hmm.
not confident, not outwardly accepting. And
Mm-hmm.
then you begin to heal the inner self. You're on that journey of healing your inner self, where there's a congruency or a match between what you're showing on the outside or showing to the outside world and what you feel on the inside of you. And I think that's until we get that relationship right, then all of our other relationships, whether they're friendships, workships, romantic relationships, family relationships, they're all a little bit broken. They're
Mm-hmm.
not,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, fully healed until we are fully healed. And I don't want to suggest that there's a beginning, middle, and end to this, but but our relationship with ourself evolves over time, just like our relationships with others evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you if you could describe for us, if now where you are standing now, if you can reflect on that change in yourself, that acceptance of self, that evolution of self, and how that translated into the evolution of relationships with the people around you, the people that you love, the people that you've come in and out of love with. Maybe we can start with you and then maybe family. And if we have time, go into other types of relationships.
Girl, you can ask some questions. That's a good one. Oh my God. Yes. That's like the fundamental question that people have, right? So it's a very important question because people are, I'm finding myself. Someone's always trying to find themselves, right? You have people go off to India to find themselves, only to realize that, they didn't have to go to India to do that.
That they're
Um,
already there, right? They're always with them, right? No matter where you go, you're with you. You're there. You find yourself there.
Absolutely.
It's
And
always the journey to yourself, back to
yes,
yourself.
yes, I have done that many times. I've moved away because I was thinking that it was everybody else around me who was causing all of this pain and turmoil inside of myself, when in fact it was me and the stories that I was telling myself. It was really important for me to develop that inner connection, which I know it seems, you often say when people come into the Money Consciousness Club that they are in the right space to receive. Like, you can't come into that space without your heart open to receive, because it is truly a heart space. And so it's kind of difficult to really explain, for everyone to get it, because everyone is not in that space. And so the best I can say is that I just always felt like I heard my higher self speaking to me. I didn't know how to articulate what that was. I probably was always referring to it as God speaking to me. But I always knew that no matter what I felt and no matter how bad I felt, I always felt like things would get better. I felt like God wanted me to be happy. So even though there was a lot of unhappiness, I held the belief that I could be happy. And then so with that, I feel like I was led to I used to tell my stories all the time. And I had a particular friend who I used to share my stories with all of the time. He lived in New York, and he'd just listen to me, and he'd never give me any advice. And then one day I was one of those times that I jetted away and I went to New York and I stayed with my cousin for a little while. And that friend had given me a book, my first self-help book. And I remember when I cracked that book open, it was like the words were they illuminated. Like it was like this, they made sense. It was like, okay, all the things that I had been feeling and thinking inside of myself, someone has actually wrote this in a book. So I'm not crazy.
Right, right.
Right? Because when you're around people who are religious, because I come from a religious background. When you come from that, there's a very narrow view of life. And so I would, even though there was a lot biblically that I believed, there was a lot that wasn't for me. And I didn't feel like I had to buy it all. And so there was a lot of self conversation that I would have. And I remember having these conversations as early as elementary school. I remember thinking and knowing and feeling, like I said in the last podcast interview, that I came here in my body and knowing I was in my body, but also feeling it, like, and it all just kind of helped me to continue to search. And as I searched, then the universe just brought people in my path or books in my path that helped me to continue to evolve with this self-knowledge and self-worth and value.
I think, that inner journey, that relationship with yourself is the one that's most overlooked. And when we are ready, I think we've talked about this before, the right people, the right resources will show up for you when you are ready.
Mm-hmm.
When we're going through the relationship with ourselves, I think that as we move forward and we are more open and aware, the correct people and resources show up for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we heard that in our clubhouse room today, where your good friend said, I came into the room and I couldn't hear the frequency,
Mm-hmm.
that I wasn't ready. I needed something high vibrationally, like really kind of over the top, because I was in that stressed high, space where I needed to hear like my own resonance reflected back to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on this high, kind of crazy place, and you're calm and quiet, and I needed someone to match my frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as we evolve in ourself, we raise our vibration. And when we do that, the people that are at that vibration, that are in that evolutionary space, they begin to reveal themselves to us. And similarly with the readings and the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that was brought up was the fact that you can be doing this inner work of yourself, but then you notice that there's a mismatch in the energies of your family members, people that you were close to or closest to, that those relationships begin to rub or shift because you no longer are in the same place. You don't believe the same things. You don't speak the same language anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have a different way of being. So as you begin to evolve in yourself, can you share with us how the relationships with your family members began to shift?
I remember when I was 18, I was in my final year of high school. And my oldest sister was is always and has always been very perceptive, and she had this gift of knowing and this power that I didn't understand because I'm 11 years younger than her. We were born on the same day, 11 years apart, and it's funny because I didn't mention that in the room, but I always say she's my twin 11 years later. I'm 11 years later. And so we did have a lot and do have a lot in common as far as that knowing and perception. And so she left actually a letter on my pillow, and it was saying that, she really needed to talk to me about something, and it was very important that I meet with her. And I knew right away what it was. I knew that it was going to be about my sexuality. And so when I got to her home, she, told me this long story and just kind of setting it up to let me know that her knowing was at a higher frequency, and that what I was getting ready to tell her was super important. And so she said to me that if I did not let go of this, she called it a demon of femininity, that I was going to hell. And I remember I was so afraid because I didn't want to go to hell. It's like, okay, well, I mean, what do I do? What do I need to do to not have this happen to me? And so she prayed over me, and it was funny because after she prayed over me, I had a moment. I did have a release, but the release really was of the fact that now it was no longer a secret. It had nothing to do that any demon had been delivered from me. It was more so about the fact that now the secret is out. And so then I had to go from there. I'm trying to understand, like, that my sister said that I was supposed to have been delivered from this, but I still have the same feelings and the same thoughts. And so one thing led to another, and she was, I realize now that she was doing what she thought was best for me. And I mean, if you believe someone in your family that you love is going to hell, I mean, I would hope that you would want to help me to not to not go, And so I realized that now, but at the time, I felt like all I felt was unacceptance. I wasn't being accepted, and I felt like I had been someone who had always accepted her and had always been there for her for everything, to babysit the children, to, accepting the relationships that she had been in, accepting all of the decisions that she had made for her life, that she's, there were things that she said she wanted to do that she didn't do, and there was things that she said she didn't want to do that she did, and I went along with it all. And then so to have someone who took me under her wings, like, I feel like she always often says that it was my two brothers and then it was her. And so she used to, she's the oldest, so it was her and then my two brothers. And she would, like, be bored, and she'd be knocking over their trains while they're playing on their train set and everything. And so when I came, even though my mom was expecting another cis female, um, she still was, I was born labeled as male, but my sister I felt this connection because we were born on the same day. And so she took me under her wings, and I wanted to be like my sister. I thought she was just the most beautiful person, like, inside and out. And I admired her beauty and the way she moved in her life. And I wished that I was, closer in age so that I could go out with her and her friends. And so this was someone who I truly valued, and then to feel like I wasn't valued because of who I am it was devastating for me.
Lady Garland, you I'm going to read a quote from your book. And now that many years have passed since this conversation with your sister, who you looked up to, who was a role model for you, who you're connected to by birth, born on the same day, 11 years apart. You said, and it wasn't in reference to your sister, but it was in reference to another relationship. But tell me how this lands. You said, when we hear the weak roar, we become frightened, but really they just want to be loved like anyone else.
Hmm.
When you think about your sister, and you said that there were many things that she wanted to become or do that didn't happen, and many things that she didn't want that she became or did. Do you feel that there was, I know that there was religious undertones, religious beliefs. Like you said, she believed that you held a demon of femininity, the demon of femininity. Do you think that part of her reveal to you came from a place of her own, not, I guess, not being actualized, like not in herself being or doing what she wanted to do or be?
Absolutely. When my father passed away, I was 16, and she was pregnant with her second child. And my father and her had a really great relationship. Like, she really depended on my father. Her and my mom did not get along. And so that's part of that too, that gave her the disconnect, because she did not have a good relationship with my mother. And that was never resolved. And so she went with that throughout her life. And, she swore she didn't want to be like my mom. And I spoke about this in the Money Consciousness Club, that she ended up doing the same thing. She had 5 children like my mom did. And then she had the eldest daughter to watch over her siblings. And that's what my mom did with her. And so as I went through and I tore apart, when I went back over my life, as I was discovering myself, and I got to see the universe revealed to me the hurts of everyone in my family. And I saw for my sister the hurt of not really truly being able to live her life the way she wanted to. And she had no one to help her do that, because she was the eldest and she was already held at a parenting status. And so she took it seriously. And then even my father, before he died, asked her to help keep the family together. So she had a lot on her, and I feel when I talk about, I haven't really like, openly talked about this, because it still hurts. Like, it hurts that I'm not, I used to pretend that I was okay, like, oh, I just feel like I don't have a sister anymore, but that's not true. And the more I grow into myself and who I am, I start to feel that connection with her again, but in a different way, and a more loving and accepting way. And but I understand that she also, there was a great loss and imbalance for her emotionally and in every way when my father passed away. And so she connected to a different religion, a more non-denominational, but then she had gravitated and looked at these ministers as father figures. And then every time they let her down, it was like a loss of a father again. Now, these are things that I haven't discussed with her, obviously, but these are things that I found out, just the universe revealed these things to me to understand what she has gone through and is still going through, because she's estranged from our family for many different reasons. And so, yes, so there's been major disconnects in her life and not being able to be who she really is. Because she did tell me one day one day I remember she approached me, and she did give me some kind of acceptance of the fact of me being myself. And so that was a good question that you asked. And I forgot that we did have a moment where she was trying, you could tell she was trying to figure it out. She didn't quite understand how I could, but this is at the point where when I told her that, hey, this is not the path that you've taken. It's not the path that works for me. But she was still trying to get me into her path. And then somewhere along in that journey, she was kind of giving me a little bit of a props that, at least I'm fighting to be myself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, when I do my conscious work and I do my healing work, I can feel those unresolved wounds in people, the ones that are unspoken or the ones that have been carried for decades. Sometimes they're carried for generations, as we know. Do you think that while you are both still living, that you want to or can make closure with your sister?
I ended up getting some sort of closure with her because I used to have dreams about us arguing with each other because I had there was a point where I had to keep fighting to disconnect from her because I was finding my individuality. I'm fresh out of high school. All of this came out, and she was, trying to guide me and steer me, which a big sister would do, right? And she tried to do that, and she was relentless. And so I was writing her letters, leave me alone. I have to do this on my own. I don't need your help with this. What you want from me is not what I feel is best for me. And, again, I couldn't understand that she was trying to be helpful, but it felt too much something that was detrimental for me. And truly it was at that time. That's what it felt like because it was going against everything that my body and my soul was telling me was right for me. And so I used to have this reoccurring dream that she and I were having an argument, and so I was tired of having that dream. I've even had that dream while I was living with her at one point. I lived with her in my teens, when I was trying to, change or get rid of that demon. I lived with her for a while, and I used to have that dream while I was living with her. And so even as into an adult, it would come back to me. And so one day, one of my mentors, she told me about writing a letter and burning it and writing it in pencil because something about the lead goes into the atmosphere. And so I wrote my first letter to her and didn't send it. And the next dream I had, I was getting farther away from her, and she was still yelling at me, but I wasn't yelling at her. And then after a couple of more letters, I think the final letter was just thanking her. And then the next dream that I had years later, I was in my 30s. We were actually having a conversation, and we were both listening to each other. And so I woke up out of that dream, and I asked my mom for her number, and I sent her a text, and I apologized to her because we had a cousin who's since passed. She used to be very controlling over my sister, and my sister was controlling over everyone else. And so I remember one day she asked me, did I feel like that she was as controlling as our cousin was? And I remember immediately lying to her, and I said, no, because I didn't feel like she would be able to take it if I told her the truth. And so when I contacted her, I apologized for that and I told her what happened. And I said, maybe if I was honest with you, maybe things would have been different with us. I said, I'm not ready to cultivate a relationship with you now. I said, but I just needed to make that peace. And so that way, if we ever see each other, we can speak to each other or say hello without having this negative energy between us.
Mm. Wow, that's a heavy one. Because I think, as we spoke about earlier today, there's some individuals in our lives that we are more deeply connected to. Maybe from birth, like you said, we were born on the same day, 11 years apart, and that you felt that immediate connection, and she with you. Because of that, I told you I also have an aunt who I was to be born on her birthday, but I was born the next morning, and we had that connection in life. That as I grew older, I began to resist wanting to be my own person. And I'm sure twins do that. I'm sure other connected people do that. Juniors, the thirds, the fourths, whatever the family, trying to cultivate their own identity. But I think I wonder if there's something to it. That, we talk about no accidents in the universe, that there are no coincidences, that they're all for something for us to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that all of those relationships, whether we like them or not, there's something in them for us. Like there's a reason that we're involved, even if we feel that we were helpless babies or born into those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, I speak about this in my first book, The Duality of Being, that we come in little baby bodies, but we have infinite souls.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have this inner wisdom that, transcends time, space, and geography. And that, yes, we come into a human infant form and we have to relearn many things, but
Mm-hmm.
we've lived before and we have a consciousness that's quite expansive and a knowing that's very deep. And so sometimes, I have come into the awareness that we travel in soul groups, that we incarnate as families and friends and lovers as groups, that we've known each other through the ages. And that maybe, your sister or you had a different configuration of relationship in past existences,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if we can know that for sure or with certainty, but the possibility, I believe, is there, that you're connected on a very deep soul level.
Well, one thing that I hope for now, because like I said, I kind of shut that part of my life down. But as I continue to expand in myself and learn more about myself and have more empathy and understanding for others, I really actually felt like this interview, with me actually truly being open about my feelings of it all, would somehow energetically, because I would always tell my mom, because my mom would be sad because her and even my younger sister, they're both estranged from the family, and I haven't seen my nieces and nephews on either side in I don't even know how many years now. And so my mom would always be hurt about it and always wanting them to come back into her life. And I said, listen, I said, Mom, I said, stop thinking about your daughters. I said, and just, focus on the children getting older and wanting to know who their grandmother is and that they'll come back to you. I said, I don't believe that these girls are ever going to change. But I changed my mind on that. I changed my thoughts on that. And I feel like even me speaking about it honestly in this interview will somehow energetically create a shift. That's what I hope for.
That's beautiful. Do you think that you will share this interview with your sister?
I believe that this interview will find its way to her.
Very good. Well, Lady Garland, let's take a short break and continue the conversation.
Okay.
Hang on.
Like what you're hearing so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. How would you describe your relationship with money? Did you ever imagine that your deepest feelings and beliefs about money could be preventing you from acquiring all the wealth that you desire? Click the link below in the show notes to learn more about Dr. Nicholas's highly sought-after Frequency of Money program to positively transform your relationship with money. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
So, Lady Garland, this episode is all about relationships. And I think we'd have the experience of having awareness around what is broken or what is difficult or what doesn't feel good in relationships. And then we can begin to shift it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that we can begin to shift it is in our thoughts, how we think about it. Like you said before the break, I thought differently about that relationship between my mother and my other sisters. And maybe there is a possibility for reconciliation somewhere along the way. And another part is shifting our feelings and our beliefs. So we can shift our thoughts, we can shift how we speak, we can shift our language, we can shift our feelings and our beliefs. I wanted to read another quote from the Memoirs of a Geisha, and it's related to the quote that I read earlier about when we hear the weak roar, we become frightened. This one is a lighter quote, but I think it helps us to frame the experiences that we're going through in our various relationships in life. I think this is particularly true with work relationships, with friendships, with romantic love ships, that we find ourselves in a pattern or a cycle. And this is what you shared with the readers in your magnificent book, Memoirs of a Geisha. You said, if you've ever played the game Super Mario Brothers, you know that you can end up playing one level continuously. Until you pass that particular level, you will not be able to move to the next. This is literally the exact process we go through in life. The cycles repeat themselves. The key is getting better and learning something new each time, and you get farther ahead. So I think this is like a pivotal, like a key of life, that no matter what the nature of the relationship, if we see a pattern repeating itself, then we can't elevate or move to the next type of relationship or an elevated space until we recognize and we pass, like we pass that level. And so I want to share with you something that I've experienced with my romantic relationships. And I feel like I'm in the process of leveling up, if you will. So every time that I've been in a romantic relationship, and I've only to this point in my life had romantic relationships with men, I always find myself unfulfilled. And I went through a relationship with my son's father. We had, a 15-year relationship. And when that relationship ended, I had 5 years with myself, healing the relationship with myself. I knew that there was lots of work to do. And that in that relationship ended, I could think of a long, line of reasons of issues on his side, but I could think of as many, if not more, in my own self, things that needed healing. And so fast forward, I come through 5 years of what I call my alone time or time with myself. And I say to myself, okay, now I'm ready for love. I'm ready for a different relationship. I'm different. I'm ready for a different relationship. And I didn't date for 5 years of my alone time. And when I began dating, I remembered why I didn't like dating. I was like, I hate going through this, da 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 da. And I always felt unfulfilled. Like I could sense it in a moment that this wasn't going to work, or, it would be a very short amount of time that I would come to the awareness that this isn't it. This isn't the one. And I have found it, that I'm kind of in that again, where I'm like, okay, I'm in a relationship, but I'm not wholly fulfilled. And I think that it comes from me not being wholly fulfilled within my own self.
Mm.
And someone said to me, like the first person that I dated, we met on a dating app, eHarmony. We met at a coffee shop, and that's how we ended up meeting, but it was through that app. And I remember saying that I was nervous about entering a new relationship, even though I had waited 5 years and I told myself I'm ready and love and all this stuff and I'm different. I feared being unfulfilled. And he said to me, if you're afraid of that, then you will be. If that's a concern, then you're going to be. And I recognized that was true. But I couldn't figure out what it was within me that was so unfulfilled. And I would say, as I've been doing this work of introspection around that I feel like this sits squarely with me, like there's something within me. And just the other day, I was having my own little mental kind of exercise where I was saying, this is the life that I have, but this is not the life that I want. Like, I had this whole idea and this whole imagination of the life that I want to be living. And I feel like I'm not living it. I get glimpses of it, little pieces of it, some big pieces of it. But if I look at the whole thing, it's not exactly how I want to be living my life. And I believe that's where the unfulfillment comes. And so if I'm unfulfilled within my own self, then I'm unfulfilled in all my other relationships. Like there's something missing or lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could share with us your experience, because I know that in your book, you talk about a lot of relationships. You talk about work relationships. Even today, you spoke about being employed with a self-employed, having employers. You've talked about your romantic relationships, your love relationships. Has there been anything that you've noticed on your journey of self-awareness, of self-evolution, of higher consciousness that perhaps has held you back or is still holding you back?
Thank you for sharing that. You unpacked a lot there, sister.
Yes.
I was thinking, wow, like, my current relationship with David, I'll mention his name because he's like, you don't say my name. So I'll mention his name, my current guy. And he doesn't like when I say current either. So I don't know what to call him.
Well, I like David. I've heard a lot about him. So let's talk about David.
David is, I remember when we had this moment, and I was having this moment because when I really talk about him, like I always get emotional, because I remember we had this moment on the second date, and I remember sitting on his lap, and I remember he laid his head on my chest, and I remember us both. We didn't really say anything, but we knew, like, it was just like, okay, this is not going to work, and he left. He left my house and he sent me a text. And I didn't realize until later that he was also saying goodbye, like, in words. And so he told me, and I'll never forget it. He said, "Thank you for spending time with me." He said, "You are special." And I didn't realize that he was saying goodbye, but then I heard something in my spirit say, "Oh, he's going to contact you again." Now, mind you, I was I was dating, so I really wasn't like focused on whether or not he was going to contact me. Which that voice went through me really quickly. It was a very
Mhm.
quick voice, and 3 days later, he contacted me, and I remember it was funny because I said, "Oh, I knew you would contact me," and he said, "Well, then why didn't you contact me? Why did you wait for me to contact you?" I said, "Because I knew you were going to, so why I didn't need to."
Mm.
But I used to think about that moment that we shared because when we first on our on our first official date, which I think was the second date, was the first official date. We kind of met at a coffee house the first time, and then the second time he took me out to dinner. And I remember having he was, he was very cautious about because he was like, okay, I've never been with a trans woman before. And, so he was like, you can tell that he was not comfortable.
Mhm.
And so that discomfort made me uncomfortable. And so like he was walking ahead of me and just like, like he didn't want to be seen with me. I had never experienced that before in dating as a trans woman. And so I remember when we got in his car and he turned his because he was like, "Do you want to talk about this?" Because I got upset at dinner, and I remember I had this sour face, and he was like, "Are you ready to go?" I was like, "Yes," and so I'm
Mm.
storming out of the place to go, in his car. He's like, "Do you want to talk about it?" I said, "Not right now." And so we got in the car, and I remember he turned his radio off. He said, "Okay, give it to me." And so, I told him, I said, "Listen," I said, "I have spent a lot of time working on myself and feeling comfortable with myself." I said, and so, and being around people who affirm me. I said, "So this what's happening right now with us and whatever this is," I said, "This is not going to work for me." And I remember, he kept telling me, he was trying to explain himself. He was like, this is not something that I've ever done before. You need to have some patience with me, please. And I remember we ended up laughing, but he said something so profound. He said, "You act like you're so confident and secure, but really you have a lot of insecurities." I said, "Exactly, but I didn't have to deal with that until I met you." So, with that said, this entire journey has been 5 years this year. And I do those temperature checks. I think it's important. I've talked to people of all ages in relationships for 35 and 40 years. And I just tell them, like, I don't even have to ask them. I said, I know that even 40 years later that you still question, is this okay for me? I know you do. Because it's just who we are as people. We question things and we want to know, like, we're all constantly evolving. So is that person still somebody I want to be with? And so I do. I do those temperature checks. And recently I had one, and I realized, like, I'm good. Like, I like what we
Mm.
do. I like where we are. And I've been on the other end of that too, saying, like, I don't know about this. I'm not sure. But what I do, if we'll go dive deeper into this, what has happened along this relationship, I was praying to God to help me to um, to heal my father issues or my father figure story. And
Mhm.
so I was like, "You've helped me in a lot of areas. You've pointed things out to me, but this is one that you have not yet, uh, you know, got into with me on a deeper level." And so when I met David, I not only saw myself, my younger self in him that I had to make peace with, is that I also saw indications of my father there and saw me repeating behaviors that my mother did with my father. And so God was like showing me all along this relationship that I've been trying to run from. And he hates when I say that. Oh, why were you trying to leave me? Really, I can say it in this interview that I was trying to leave, not leaving him, leaving from seeing myself. It was too hard. It was difficult. It was uncomfortable. It was challenging. And so, but God allowed someone to be in my life who is loyal and who stays in relationships. And I never knew how to do that. And so I needed someone like him that was like, hey, don't give up on this just yet. Because if he was just like me, it would have been done.
You would have cut
And
and
so,
run. Yeah.
yeah. And so I needed someone that had that stability. And so
Mm.
in him being stable, and he said to me once when I was saying, well, maybe this is just not going to work. He said to me, I said, and then before the end of the conversation, we settled things. And I said, I really like that you can bring me back. And then he said, well, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. He said, maybe that's not really what's supposed to be. I said, no, listen. If it's over and it's going to be over, there's nothing you can say or do to make me stay. So that just lets me know that I'm supposed to be here because we always end up being able to come back together with a greater knowledge of what we are doing here with each other. And I have
Right.
seen, I understand that not being fulfilled. Because we're always looking for others to fill in those gaps. And so, and they do fill in the gaps somewhat, but they can't fill in them all. And so, as I continue to grow into myself, our relationship continues to grow. And so, even when I started coming to the Money Consciousness Club, I started learning so much, and I was changing, and he saw it. And he was a bit afraid of that. And then I told him, I said, listen, I said, I like being with you. I like what we do. I said, but what I'm not going to do is be pulled back to the cycle that we were in. We had never stopped it. And then I started pulling away because I was like, wait, this is not enough. Like there's more that I need to get for myself. And so I started putting myself as an individual in this relationship. We come together as a couple, but we're two individual people. And so I needed to level up to where I had been because I had learned so much from the years that we had been together. I was seeing myself. I was seeing myself and all the things that I need. It was a reflection. He's been this mirror. And so I had
Mm-hmm.
no choice but to see me. And so in seeing myself, even though it was challenging, it was the best thing that could ever happen to me. So anytime that this relationship has to end, if it has to, I will not leave this relationship shattered like I have in my first relationship, trying to figure out and put all the pieces together because now I am whole. And so I can be whole in this relationship and not be judgmental of where he is. Maybe he's a little bit behind or maybe he's not
Just
quite
different.
where.
Yeah.
Yes. And so but it doesn't affect what I think about as us as individuals or as us as a couple. It really is it's compartments. And it's life is really challenging because I mean, how can you really be with somebody, right? And there's you, there's them, and then there's the relationship. There's a
Mm-hmm.
three-part
Mm-hmm.
thing to this, and we just have seen that, and we think that it's like, oh, we become one, and we're this union, and we're this. No, I'm still an individual person. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mm-hmm.
like all the things you like. You don't have to like all the things I like. But you said something very profound in the beginning of this interview is that it's the differences, and that's something that I've learned, and I think I wrote that in my book too, is that I learned to appreciate the differences with
Mm-hmm.
everyone. And so but I had to appreciate my own difference before I can appreciate it in others.
Mm. You said something about that conversation that you had with David when you said, I didn't have to deal with my insecurities until I got with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and you chuckled about that, but it's a truth, right? And
Mhm.
it made me reflect on um, my own life, where it's very similar. Like there's a lot of similarities in it, where I feel like I'm this, visionary person, and I'm literally like expanding to the edge of creation of consciousness. Um, I have this ability to experience multiple dimensions of consciousness and awareness of understanding. And then I find myself in a relationship with a very earthly person, like, that's not expansive in that way, but has the things that I am lacking, if you will,
Mhm.
like that stability, that, um, like, like that connection to the earth, like solidness.
Mhm.
I feel very sometimes ephemeral, like just very almost detached. And then I've got this weight of an individual in my life who's very grounded. And I mean, I feel like I recognize the value in it, and I guess the mirror,
Mhm.
yeah, the reflection. So the temperature checks you talk about, I call these reality checks, that I don't take anything for granted in relationships,
Mhm.
of any sort, romantic or otherwise. And uh, the the past me would have run away from this situation, from this mirror. And I don't know. I
You
think
know,
now I've evolved to the point where I do recognize that I need to be here, and that I do have the choice at any time to not be here.
here's what I always tell my friends, and I've been saying this, like even when I was in my early 30s, and they would be in these relationships that were mirrors, and I would tell them, and this was even before I was 13 years single before I met David, and so it was funny because I would tell them, because I learned so much after that first relationship was over, um, and that's how it helped me get to my book, Memoirs of a Geisha, was all those lessons that I had learned from that one individual. And so all those stories that I told was me, like I got the knowledge and then I had to implement it. So this is the part of that game of the Super Mario Brothers. It's like you get more knowledge and then you have to implement it. So even with relationships, I would tell them, I would say, listen, if you just don't want to be in a relationship at all, I said, then leave this relationship. I said, because if you think
Mhm.
you're going to get out of this one and not repeat the same thing in the
Right.
last relationship, I said, then you're fooling yourself. I said, so if you want to be alone. I said, and so in my book, I also talk about life being a series of repeats. You can
Mhm.
press pause. You can pause it, but I guarantee you, because it was so insane that after my first relationship was over, that when I was 3 years single and celibate, and I went into this relationship with this guy who he was crazy about me, just like my first relationship was. And he was crazy about me. And I swear to you, Dr. Susan, that there was similarities, like my first boyfriend was in a relationship for 11 years that had ended. This guy had an 11-year relationship that had just ended. I mean, there was all of these like distinct
Mhm. Mhm.
similarities from pausing for 3 years and then pressing play again, and then I ended up exactly
It's like
where
where
I
you
had left
started.
off. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I had to I knew, I recognized it, and I said, "Oh no, I have to end this." He didn't want it to end. I'm actually didn't mention that I'm working on a second book that is about relationships, and so I'm talking about this in that book about that what happened in that relationship, and I knew that I needed to run, and he didn't want. Oh my God, he wanted me so bad, and I was like, nope. I can't explain fully why this, but something is
Like, been
telling me.
there, done that, yeah.
something is telling me not to do this again. Like, because
Yeah.
at first I even thought to myself, I said, okay, well, maybe I can be with him. And then this could be my test of not, making the same mistakes I did in that first relationship. And then I was like, There was enough more, a sign after a sign after a sign that was saying, this is a no. This is a no-go. So we have to, if we're going to break away from those patterns, we talk about this in the Money Consciousness Club all the time, is the awareness and consciousness. If we're not conscious of what's happening, then we're just going to repeat, because first of all, we haven't seen ourselves enough to transmute all of the craziness that we've held on to, or unpack all the traumas that we have, to even be able to recognize. If we haven't done that, we won't even recognize the fact that we are repeating this.
Right.
And so with David, what was so beautiful was that I had grown enough, and I had utilized all the nuggets that I had gotten from that first relationship, allowed myself to have a 13-year span of single, celibate, off and on this journey, and learning to be okay with myself. But I wasn't going to get any further. I mean, I would have, but it was just a slow process. But with David, I feel like I got to because even with Super Mario's, what happens is each level gets faster. It starts going
Mm.
faster. And so with David, I had a faster, it's almost like they have these, you can go and get your master's, and instead of getting it in 3 years, you can get it in 2 years, but it's like an elevated course. It's
Accelerated. Yeah.
yes, accelerated course. And so I feel like David was my accelerated course. And
Mm.
and just him being himself. It's not that he's ever, had these type of conversations that we're having right now. It was just something about him being himself that allowed me to see what I needed to see in myself, to recognize the issues that I had with my father. And since meeting you and being and unpacking the traumas in the Money Consciousness Club, I have been able to do a final healing with my father, to know that
Mm.
he truly loved me. Words that he spoke to me when I thought he was dying, that didn't go inside of my spirit at all. So many years later,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to have those words go in me and know that he loved me, and I know that he can rest. So there's all of these things that I honor this relationship for, rather than it used to be me just looking at what he was doing and what he was saying, what he wasn't doing,
Mm-hmm.
what was hurting me, what, I didn't like, and
Mm-hmm.
to looking at, like, you know what? This relationship is making me better.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what holds me here. And when I do that temperature check, I realize that I have fun with him. I was just even thinking about it this morning. He was being silly, and he makes me laugh. Dr. Susan, you and I always talk about how serious we are. I'm always thinking about what it is about, like I have to be focused, and I have to be, and I have learned so much. I mentioned the Money Consciousness Club a lot, because this club has also helped accelerate where I was, right? I was on that path already, but now I have enough in me. I feel the chills on my legs. I have enough in me to have come to this space through this relationship to learn more about myself, to now coming into the Money Consciousness Club, and also having this acceleration of who I am, and why I am here, and why I belong here. Every single person and every single thing and every single resource that we have, that has come in our lives, had a purpose to lead me here to this second interview with you. And so life, is challenging, but if we are aware and focused, as you always say, if we are watching life unfold in front of us and not look at it as life is happening to us, but for us, it takes away the pressure.
Mm. I'm going to close this interview with something I've said a lot of times, and a quote that you want our listeners to know. The first is that the situation may change, the time may change, people in our lives, we physically may change, but we know that we're seeing something or a pattern over again. If we still feel the same way inside, that we haven't graduated to the next level.
Mm.
Not yet, not yet.
Mm-mm.
The feeling is still the same. Just like that feeling of unfulfillment, that there's still something that needs to be shifted or graduated from or learned, experienced. And then the second part you said in this podcast interview, you said you want everyone to know that it doesn't matter when you start the process of healing, because it's never too late to start anew and to improve the path for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And Lady Garland, I want to thank you so much for this encore interview. I know it will touch many in whatever relationship issue they are having, pattern that they are seeing recurring in their life, the feelings that are recycling over and over and over again, giving them a window into themselves and what the possibilities are when they go into themselves, go into this conscious work, into this space to shift and transform it.
Amen.
I want to thank you all for taking this inner journey with us. And remember, whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, to always be conscious. If you love this episode and if today's message resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Be Conscious podcast. I want to know what inspired you and what conscious topics you would like to learn more about. And if you want, you can share those thoughts with me at info@susannicholas.org.
Thanks for listening to the Be Conscious podcast with author, TEDx international speaker, and conscious coach, Dr. Susan Nicholas. Be sure to connect with her to stay up to date with her latest news and works. Learn more about her conscious speaking platform at susannicholas.org/speaking. Stay tuned for the next thought-provoking episode. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious.